Good afternoon and welcome to this additional council meeting. Item 1, acknowledgement. We, Greater Shepparton City Council, acknowledge the Yorta Yorta peoples of the land which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay our respect to their tribal elders, we celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Item 2, privacy notice. This public meeting is being streamed live via our Facebook page, made available for public access on our website along with the official minutes of this meeting. All care is taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, it is assumed that your consent is given in the event that your image is broadcast to the public. It is also assumed that your consent is given to the use and disclosure of any information that you share at the meeting, including personal or sensitive information to any person who accesses those recordings or minutes. And we do welcome members in the gallery this afternoon. Item 3, governance principles. Council considers that the recommendations contained in this agenda gives effect to the overarching governance principles stated in section 9.2 of the Local Government Act 2020. These principles are as followed. Councillors, they're listed 1 to 9 on page 5 of the agenda. Over the page to page 6, item 4, apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies this afternoon? Councillor Latson.
I'd like to note Councillor Greg James with an apology today.
Thank you. Can I have a councillor second that motion? Councillor Spinks. Councillors, all in favour? Motion carried. Item 5, declarations of conflict of interest. Councillors, do we have any conflicts this afternoon? No, very good. Over the page to page 7, item 6.1, conflict in Gaza. The recommendation that I'll get someone to put forward as a motion, as there isn't an official recommendation there, but a recommendation is not provided by council officers, referred to the attachment prepared by Councillor Abdullah. Can I have a councillor put forward a motion, please? Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you. I would like to move a motion, and I will read out the whole motion. That the council to resolve to, number 1, acknowledge that sections of the Greater Shepparton community are deeply impacted and grieving due to the human rights abuse of Palestinians. Number 2, write a letter to the federal government to take the following actions. A, condemn the indiscriminate bombing and attacks on hospitals, schools, and refugee shelters that have resulted in the killing of thousands of civilians, including women and children in Gaza. Excuse me, I'll grab a glass of water. Number B, advocate for all Palestinian and Israeli hostages to be released. C, call for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire and an end to incursions onto Palestinian land. D, recognize the state of Palestine. E, call for Israel to comply with its obligations under international law. F, call for the immediate lifting of the siege on Gaza to allow Palestinians in Gaza to have unlimited access to food, water, fuel, electricity, medical supplies, and construction materials to repair damaged homes and civilian infrastructure. And G, increasing funding to UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, and contribute generously to UNRWA's call for emergency funding.
Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. Can I have a councillor second that motion, please? Councillor Adam.
Yes, sir.
Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. So this additional council meeting has been organized because parts of our community have been asking the council to take a stand on the ongoing conflict in Gaza and the relentless attacks on Palestinian lives and lands. In November last year, I brought a motion asking the council to acknowledge that parts of our local community are deeply impacted and grieving due to the events in Gaza because they have strong family, social, and human connections with the Palestinian victims of the conflict, and also for the council to write a letter to the federal government calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Palestine. Unfortunately, that motion was lost by a vote of 5-4. The narrow defeat of that motion shattered the hopes of many in Shepparton's multicultural as well as Anglo-Australian communities They had expected the council to stand with them in condemning the renewed escalation of violation of human rights and this live-streamed ethnic cleansing. The people of Shepparton wanted their local government to represent their voices by advocating for more decisive actions from the Australian government. Since then, the genocide has continued unabated. The world watches in horror as women and children are being mass murdered, their bodies dismembered, and their homes and towns reduced to rubble by sophisticated war machines, all in the name of self-defense. Despite global protests, the genocide in Palestine goes on without an end in sight. Locally, people in Greater Shepparton continue to express their grief, hurt, and sadness over these human rights violations. From vigils to petitions, emails to councils and conversations, they ask the council to acknowledge their pain and advocate for them at the federal level. As a councillor, my responsibility is to listen to the community and bring forward issues that affect its well-being. That is why this meeting, led by Councillors Adam, Spinks, and me, is our final attempt in this council term to place this matter on the council agenda. It should not be difficult for the council to recognize human sufferings and write a letter urging the federal government to advocate for peace and an end to atrocity in a more impactful manner. Now, let me also address some of the arguments and narratives that have been presented, mostly by my fellow councillors, during this whole time against this action. Number one narrative. This action or advocacy is outside the scope of local government, and that the community wants the council to focus on roads, rates, and rubbish. Let's be clear that local government is not confined to a narrow lane. Councillors regularly champion issues they are passionate about on behalf of their community, and the council takes up these issues. We don't hesitate to support local businesses or economic issues. So why the double standards for supporting the local community on human rights? Our community is not homogeneous. Different groups have different priorities, and it depends on whose voices we choose to hear. And the reality is that local councils can and are dealing with many issues beyond roads, rates, and rubbish. If not, the Australian Local Government Association, ALGA, a peak body of Australian local councils, could not have passed as a resolution in solidarity with Ukraine during the Russia-Ukraine war. Number two, perception. Some fellow councillors say that they sympathize with the victims of the Gaza conflict as private citizens, but they do not want to take a position in their capacity as councillors. To that, I say that our values should not change based on what hat we are wearing. How can anyone claim to hold on one set of values as a private citizen and another as a councillor? This inconsistency is unacceptable when it comes to human rights. Number three, the repeated statement from some that the Premier has advised councils to stay out of this matter. Now, to me, this is a politics of convenience. How often has this council not pursued matters in the community's best interest, despite a lack of support from other levels of government? Have we ever stopped advocating on behalf of our communities? This narrative repeatedly promoted here that councils should not engage in international politics is flawed. It overlooks the reality that this international conflict is directly impacting and affecting our local community, impacting their health, their well-being, and confidence in being valued and heard by our local council leadership. Councillors have received emails from some community members in the last 24 hours telling us how this issue is impacting them and their well-being. And I share a quote from a resident who wrote that it is a local matter too. As a GP and a skincare doctor, I had to take so many days off work as I was in such an emotional state, waking up every day for the last 10 months to the videos and footages from Gaza of children with no heads, legs, or arms, kids dead under the rubble of no crime but for being Palestinian. So that is what the community is saying and telling us. In closing, I ask, what is there to lose in supporting this motion? It is simply a request to be on the right side of history and to be on the right side of humanity. By endorsing this motion in its totality, we can show that sections of our community
Councillor Abdullah.
that we hear from them. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'd like to reserve my right. Thank you, Mayor Sally.
Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion?
Mayor Sally, I do not want to speak against the motion. I would like to speak to the motion. Before that, I'd also like to foreshadow a motion that councillors have been provided with in front of them.
Thank you, councillor Brophy. Would you still like to speak to this motion or? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will be foreshadowing a motion which councillors have in front of them should the current recommendation brought by 3 councillors not get up. With respect to the current recommendation brought forward, I will be maintaining my position and abstaining from voting for the aforementioned recommendation. For me to support it, I would be taking a side of the conflict. To not support it, I would be taking the other, and I am neither. My concern was, and is now, the innocent people who have borne such great horrors and devastation. To our communities we have here in the region, from Sudan, where civil war since April last year has killed over 15,000 people and displaced some 8.2 million. To those in the Ukraine, where the figures of over tens of thousands have been killed and with no end in sight. The Rohingya refugees in Myanmar, nearly 3 million displaced, 25 million killed and over 18,000 rapes reported. We have community members impacted by those wars, yet we have no recommendation brought before us for them. No conflict is better or worse, because all is abhorrent and all is the loss of humanity. That is why we have in Australia a federal government, a government that provides foreign affairs, trade, immigration and defence, which advocates on our behalf. That is their domain, not one of state or local governments. It doesn't mean we don't care, far from that. We do. But we do have a representation to put forward Australia's position. We are a welcoming community in the Golden Valley. We are one of the greatest multicultural regions, centres here in Australia. At the core of our existence and cohabitation, we are tolerant, we are mindful, we are respectful, and we are resilient. From catastrophic flood events, pandemics, storms and fires, we know that when a community pulls together, they can overcome major disasters, and really that is human engineering at its best. But unfortunately, we see all too often human behaviours at its worst. That is what has brought us here together, to share the grief and provide maybe some glimmer of hope that has and is happening in the Middle East. Peace, harmony, brotherhood and sisterhood are the hallmarks of humanity. They are at the heart of every religion. They are the ultimate weapons against the all-powerful weapons. As human beings sharing one planet together, the same moment in time and breathing the same air, we weep for our fellow humans, the very old and the very young, all lost in these conflicts. We see images, we hear stories and we feel and share the pain for all of you over there at the moment. Our hearts break to know, and in many cases do not know, what is happening on the other side of the world. We pray for all those caught innocently in the conflict currently engulfing the Middle East. But we too think of those, of course, in the Ukraine who have borne the brunt of war, and for all those many, perhaps smaller but ultimately just as deadly conflicts in various pockets throughout the world. We pray for you. May God give you strength to carry on, give you determination, resilience, and have in your heart kindness for your fellow human. Unfortunately, truth does not need publicity, but lies and myth-truths do. In a lot of cases, we do not know the truth, but we do know that people in Shepparton have loved ones that are deeply affected with what is going on. If you are one of those here this afternoon, please know that we are thinking of your anguish, your heartbreak and possible grief. If only wars were declared by love and not hate, there would be no tears of sorrow, only tears of joy. Peace is more than the absence of war. Peace is accord. Peace is harmony. and therefore it is peace to which we strive, it is peace to which we must see as a beacon to humanity. Religion or no religion, country or no country, I think as John Lennon once put it, imagine all the people's living life in peace. Just think about it, how wonderful that would be. And I conclude with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi: "An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind."
Thank you, councillor Brophy. Are there any councillors that would like to speak for the motion? Councillor Spinks.
So I've gone back and forth on how to speak to this item all week, because ultimately there are lots of ways to do it. I thought about calling out those who should be taking this action, our local, state and federal members that don't turn up to vigils and don't write letters of support and don't advocate on behalf of this issue for the community. And again, it falls to the local government to do it instead. But I thought there was no point in that. And then I thought I could point out that council constantly is involved in matters that we really don't have any jurisdiction over or control over. We go to Hong Kong on missions for our agricultural sector. We fight for water to make sure that our farmers are protected. And neither of those technically are our jurisdiction, but we do them wholeheartedly and pour thousands of dollars into them. But I decided not to go with that. Instead, I'm just going to tell you why I'm going to vote for it. I'm not going to try and convince anybody else because, quite frankly, we've been here before. We've heard all these same arguments for and against. And the matter is in front of us again because of the passion and dedication of Councillor Abdullah, and I commend her on that and her speech. And ultimately, for me, with all due respect, it is nice if we weep for those across the water, but what they need is action, not our tears. And as a councillor, we were elected to take action, and we have a responsibility to actually do something. And our community are asking us to do something. And if all that means we're going to do is send a letter, then that's what we should be doing. And so for me, as a councillor, with the privilege and the power that this position holds, I have in front of me the opportunity to do something meaningful, because the community have asked me to do that. And so I will be supporting this, because when I look back on this council term and I look back on this moment and I look back at what the community asked me to do, I'll know that I wasn't afraid and I wasn't silent, and I spoke for them when they asked me to speak for them. And so I support this wholeheartedly, and it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Spinks. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Are there any councillors that would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Sommer.
I'm going to stick to script just so it's not taken out of context, very sensitive, but like anyone, I am shocked and appalled by the actions taking place in Gaza. The massive loss of innocent civilian lives far outweighs the collateral damage of war. We have a large multicultural community here who are directly impacted by these events, and it is important that we acknowledge their grief. And we're also a designated migrant zone, so we'll likely see an influx of refugees displaced by this disaster. So for those reasons, I'm not entirely surprised that this motion is in front of us, and I acknowledge the good intent of supporting our multicultural community. And generally, on a personal level, I do agree with the points in this motion. They are mostly humanitarian requests, and considering the influx of polio vaccines into Gaza, it demonstrates that some action can result from enough global pressure. In my personal capacity, I've been speaking at rallies, I'm offering support when available. I did support the last motion presented by Councillor Abdullah because it was a generalised letter of support prior to our Prime Minister issuing a statement calling already for most of the actions listed in this motion from a federal level. The difference between this motion and the last one is also the level of detail. Some points in this motion are largely outside my scope of understanding. And it might be consistent to support this personally where I wouldn't support it with the councillor hat. But I'm not just representing myself and my wants, I'm representing the people out there, and I feel it would be irresponsible to use my councillor position when I don't feel qualified to do so. So I also intend to abstain from this. And I really hope that abstaining isn't used as a political tool to say that I don't care about children dying, because nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that passing this motion is very unlikely to make any difference at all. It gives an illusion of taking action, but there is a risk it will only offer false hope and certainly will not result in a ceasefire. Despite massive global pressure, we are watching Israel and Hamas dismiss all attempts towards peace. And I feel we're entering very dangerous waters by asking our leaders to take a stronger stance on international war. This isn't water rights or small business, it's war. Councillors get our information from local media and word of mouth just like everyone else, but our federal government has the benefit of high-level international experts, frontline ambassadors. So I'd like to think that they have these matters in hand much more than us. There are other factors at play, surely, that the general public are not privy to, such as whether Australian involvement could make ourselves a target of war. And what would that achieve? What would that achieve for our citizens and the displaced people who need this country as a safe haven? Those risks are a matter of national security, not local government. The person to lobby is our federal member of parliament, Sam Birrell. He is best placed to make any policy changes to progress the cause of Palestinians, not local government. So without diluting the scale of this particular destruction, similar to Councillor Brophy, I'll also say that Gaza is not the only humanitarian issue affecting our community. For many years, the good people of Congo have been asking for help, as well as those from Papua New Guinea. The list goes on, as Councillor Brophy mentioned. Passing this motion will set a precedent because Greater Shepparton houses a great many nationalities in conflict, and we have remained neutral up until this point. We enjoy many freedoms in Australia. One is freedom of speech, and it's being taken full advantage of by large-scale disruptive protests against the state. And it is absolutely within the rights of ordinary citizens to stage these protests. And it's impossible to ignore such a large uprising of rage against the actions by Israel. However, I personally don't believe that antagonising our government is helpful for sound decision-making. If the government bows to popular public pressure without carefully considering important risks like whether or not Australia will go to war, we may potentially be putting our own fundamental freedoms at risk. So I'm sorry if abstaining disappoints people. I do understand many are hurting, grieving, they're angry, and understandably want to do everything they can to help our fellow man. I do get that. Please check in on each other and make sure you have lots of social support. Services are available if you're feeling overwhelmed, but local government involvement is not the answer. As a pacifist, I firmly believe war fuels war, and I implore you to honour the dead and suffering by building a legacy of peace and neutrality. We need to be grateful for our freedoms and for the opportunities that we do have in this country. Let's live every day in ways that do not perpetuate these conflicts in this country, and let's teach our children how to love each other beyond our own generation in this country. It's a painful, slow truth, and it may not happen in our lifetimes, but peace is the only thing that can stamp out war, so I'm happy to be abstaining from this.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Are there any other councillors that would like to speak to the motion? Councillor Latson.
Thank you, Mayor Sali. I'd like to take this moment to say a prayer. Dear Lord, I wish there was peace around the world. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Latson. Sorry, Councillor Dobson, did you have your hand up before to speak to the motion? I apologise if I missed that. Yes, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor Sali. It is important to put today's extraordinary council meeting in context. The meeting was called by three councillors, Councillor Abdullah, Councillor Adem and Councillor Spinks, who are entitled to call for a meeting to discuss an item that cannot be dealt with in an ordinary council meeting due to the caretaker period upcoming. In other words, council did not ask that this matter be debated, but in fact three councillors acting in accordance with the Local Government Act did request this meeting, and I think it's important to understand that. I will abstain from voting on this motion put forward by Councillor Abdullah. My reasoning is twofold. Firstly, this issue was raised and dealt with in November of last year. And for the life of me, I can't understand how it should be allowed to be brought up again. Does this mean that if it gets voted down again, it will be on council's agenda for another day? Secondly, and more importantly, why does this council think that an international conflict with both political and religious undertones is the business of local government? And I may say that all the people that I've canvassed on this issue, and I've cast a wide net for comment, agree with the assertion that this council should stay on course and deliver what the ratepayers believe it should deliver. That is, water security, proper infrastructure, sporting facilities, quality of life, community assets, efficient governance, clean streets, efficient waste management services, safe and secure surrounds, and development proposals that bring prosperity to our community. What is also said is that council should develop a safe and harmonious community, especially for those folk who are fleeing conflict around the world and corruption in other countries. I refer to the Middle East, Ukraine and Russia. I refer to corruption in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, violence in parts of Africa such as Sudan and the Congo. All of our new arrivals from these trouble spots wants to come to Shepparton to pursue a normal, happy and fruitful life. That is where our efforts should be concentrating on, not getting involved in processes that have not had the imprimatur of our community. Let me explain. There are approximately 70,000 people who live, work and play in the municipality, of which there are approximately 34,000 ratepayers. Has this council gone to the residents with this motion to ascertain as to whether the community, with 9 councillors or less, because there will be votes against the motion, have the right to make such decisions on international affairs on behalf of those ratepayers? Again, does this council have policies, guidelines or protocols to deal with international conflicts? Is there a chapter in the Local Government Act, for example, that allows this council on its own to make comment and demand on our Prime Minister? On that matter, no doubt the Minister for Local Government will be watching this meeting with interest, especially after recent comments by the Premier, who quite categorically advised local governments not to be involved in international affairs. And good afternoon, Minister. Just as frightening, has the proponents of this motion considered the effects on our local community, such as what recently happened in a Sydney-based council where the council meeting finished in chaos, where insults and threats were hurled around the council chamber when a similar motion was put to councillors? Councillors' roles are not to comment on or endorse or harangue or argue the case for any international conflict, but we are here to provide safe haven for those who are fleeing those conflicts. If this issue is agreed to in this chamber, the newspaper and television headlines around the Eastern Seaboard will certainly have a lot of fun, but the commentary will be around what they are trying to prove do the ratepayers, what the ratepayers have entrusted them to do. And now, I have sympathies with all peoples who have been touched by human carnage, and the speakers before me, I must say, have been very eloquent in what they have said, whose lives have been uprooted, whose properties have been destroyed, and whose loved ones have been killed. I recently attended a public event to acknowledge such conflict, but I went as a private citizen with private reflections and under no coercion from outside parties. I respectfully say to those who wish to have council be their advocate on these issues that you are wrong in this assumption. Certainly show your support, but clearly local government, and especially the Greater Shepparton municipality, is not the avenue that you should pursue.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Before I go to you, Councillor Adam, if you still wanted did you want to still speak to the motion? He's finished.
Certainly.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. Well, here we are again. I've heard some very, as Councillor Dobson said, very eloquent speaking to this issue. I don't want to go down this road again. I think I've said quite a lot over the last 2 attempts at this. One was the accepting of the petition, but in any case, I'll have my say. I just said my position on this issue is well documented in both a previous motion many, many months ago and at our last council meeting when speaking to a petition that council ultimately noted and accepted. Incidentally, a petition that was about an international conflict that we could have decided wasn't valid to note or accept due to its international subject matter. However, we did. Some councillors may be and are concerned that international conflicts are not matters that we should be involving ourselves with. We should be concerned with matters relevant to our municipality, to our ratepayers and to our community. I totally and wholeheartedly agree, hence why I fully support this motion. Like any decent, caring human being, I'm appalled at the continuing slaughter of children, women and non-combatant men currently occurring in Palestine. I am free, as we all are, to attend rallies and write letters calling for a stop to the violence and killing. I can and have done that in my personal capacity without involving council. However, the moment affected members of our Greater Shepparton community turn to some councillors asking for support, however ineffective it may ultimately be, we are morally obliged to act or to address those concerns. In fact, we are obliged to respond to any request from any sector of our community concerning any conflict that affects them, whether in Sudan or Ukraine. To my knowledge, we haven't been approached by those sectors of our community. We take pride and continually celebrate our unique multicultural Greater Shepparton community. So as a council, how can we now pretend that world events do not impact our community? It's quite absurd. Let's be clear, though, about the current situation. Crimes against humanity were committed on December 7th last year. The pursuit of the perpetrators of these criminal acts was and still is absolutely justified. These perpetrators have been clearly defined by most reasonable humans as criminals because of their actions. What cannot be justified, though, is committing further crimes against humanity as a response. As councillors representing affected community members, we shouldn't need to be asked to care. As empathetic human beings, we should care naturally. Care for not only the obvious defenceless victims, many of them children who have lost their lives, but also for the relatives and friends of these victims that reside in our community. Across the road from this building, in the Queen's Gardens, stands a statue of one of the greatest men of this region, if not Australia. William Cooper was well known for his political activism and advancement of the rights of Indigenous peoples of Australia. He was also especially known and revered for his stance on the persecution of the Jewish people by the Nazi regime of the late 1930s. He inspired and assisted a petition from the Australian Aboriginal League to be delivered to the German consulate in Melbourne, condemning the cruel persecution of the Jewish people by the Nazi government of Germany. We as a council decided a few years ago that his great advocacy for the plight of his own people, as well as his humanitarian stance in respect to the persecuted Jewish people, was worth a statue to commemorate his humanity. We did this. We held him in high esteem and still do, as we should. Yes, he did this in a private capacity, I hear some councillors say, but council applauded his stance, hence the statue we see there today. For heaven's sake, council, this motion is not requesting we attend a meeting of the United Nations. It's not asking to give testimony at the International Court of Justice. It's not about demonising the Jewish race, a race that historically have been subjected to unspeakable atrocities themselves. It's not about picking sides in a decades-old conflict that more informed people than us haven't resolved and may never resolve. It's simply about asking our federal government to open their eyes and see the dead children, feel the pain on all sides, and apply whatever pressure and influence within their capacity to dampen the blind rage that is driving this senseless killing. All we are asking for is immediate ceasefire to stop the death and destruction, because thoughts and prayers achieve nothing. Thank you.
Councillor Adam. I'll just speak to the motion as well, and from the outset I will be abstaining, so maintaining my position from the previous motion in November. Hard to believe it's almost been 12 months at this extremely difficult circumstance, whether you're directly or indirectly involved in any form of conflict. I've said this over the course of last year, and I can recall saying it last year, that killing of any sort is unacceptable, and humans have been killing for a very long time. Very unacceptable. And I think regardless of we stand on any conflict. It's not something that anyone should be supporting. Councillor Brophy, all councillors in actual fact have spoken extremely well about this matter, and it is back before us today. Now, Councillor Brophy didn't read out the foreshadowed motion. Councillors should all have it in front of them. You're right, this council hasn't taken a formal position regarding this conflict. We haven't done this in the past, and I can recall our former CEO requesting this council align with the over 500 others that sit within Australia to take a position and support Ukraine. And just like yourself, Councillor Abdullah, I agreed wholeheartedly with you at that particular time that we do not do this. We did not do it then, and we did, and that is not something that we supported at that particular time.
Point of order.
What is your
I
point of?
must clarify the statement that has been made, and I need to provide a context, otherwise it is very misleading.
Well, we objected to that.
So my objection is when you're saying that I had objected to this matter, the Ukraine matter, and we have discussed this many times. The only reason that I, along with other councillors, at least my stance was that we are not discussing Ukraine-Russia war, because that matter was not brought to us by any of the community member.
So that's
It was
fine.
brought up by the CEO.
So I accept that.
That was the.
So I accept that. So
explain the whole context.
get into that, and I said that. So it was brought up that we shouldn't, and rightly so, this council refused to take a position on international conflict. As we now proceed, this is something that has been brought to us by a community, and I'm not going to dismiss that for obvious reasons. Who can dismiss what's happening and the heartache that some of our community are facing at the moment? We've received a petition, so it's as full as it can possibly be from a community advocacy perspective, coming to us and wanting us to take a position. And I feel that the foreshadowed motion that is in front of us is actually that we are going to acknowledge that our community, parts of our community are hurting, and we are going to support and at least note and acknowledge the letter, the Prime Minister, the joint statement, and I'll quote from it.
Point of clarification, we are not discussing the foreshadow motion at the moment, we are discussing, so please do not refer to the.
I'm allowed to speak about whatever I want. So, information here, whether you take it as a foreshadowed motion or not, but this is information here that the Prime Minister, along with the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Canada, on the 26th of July, have called for an immediate ceasefire is needed desperately. Civilians must be protected, and a sustained increase in the flow of assistance throughout Gaza is needed to address the humanitarian situation. Not one single person could disagree with that. Our federal government are acting on this. Perhaps not to the level of some. That level can vary, and what we're here and is in front of us today is a step beyond the qualifications of anyone sitting around the table in our ability to have an influence. Councillors have sat around this table and have acknowledged that we will have no impact on this. I'm not one to play with communities' emotions. It is cruel to do that. There has to be a reality that this council cannot impact what is taking place here. And to tick a box to say that we've sent a letter to the Prime Minister, like we did for the Voice, right? And what impact did that have, right? And you're right, other local matters as well that we advocate for, water in particular, a particular item that the government are voting on and sought consultation on, and they've dismissed us like they often do. Now we want to enter into international conflict discussions. There is no doubt there are community members that are facing concerns here, and that will be acknowledged and publicly endorsed as this council today. There is no question about that. We are not going to dismiss that there are people hurting, but you have to have an understanding and a reality of what this council's capabilities are. Your movement and discussion needs to be with our federal member. He's the one that is in Parliament every second week that has speaking time and the ability to raise these concerns on behalf of the community, right? So I think that we need to understand what our capabilities are and acknowledge what we can do, and we will be doing something. And what is proposed that is from a foreshadowed perspective, if we get to that, I believe that is a very worthy and public acknowledgement of the hurt that some of our community members are facing, and to acknowledge and support the Prime Minister of Australia's statement on the 26th of July. So many things have been said, and I don't want to repeat it, but I just feel this is so far beyond local government. Our council do not have the knowledge to enter into these conversations, but we can support our federal government if we believe that the stance they're taking, which is to call for an immediate ceasefire, that is something we can do and we should do. And we will address that if this gets voted down and we get to the foreshadowed motion. That is it for me. Councillors, we will now go to the vote. No one spoke against it, so there's no right of reply.
What?
No, that's,
Is that the government?
change that.
Can you please
It
confirm?
doesn't exist anymore.
Just confirm that, please.
There's no closing comments anymore.
Need to have clarification, thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, we will now go to vote. All those in favour? Against? Those abstaining? Motion lost.
Division.
Councillors, those in favour? Councillor Abdullah, Councillor Adam, Councillor Spinks. Those against? Those abstaining? Councillor Sali, Councillor Brophy, Councillor Latson, Councillor Summer, Councillor Dobson. Motion lost. We now go to the shadowed motion. Councillor Brophy.
Mayor Saley, I'd like to read out the following recommendation. That the Greater Shepparton City Council, 1, acknowledge that sections of the Greater Shepparton community are deeply impacted due to the events taking place in Gaza and Israel. 2, note the Prime Minister of Australia's joint statement issued on the 26th of July 2024 that calls for an immediate ceasefire.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy. Can I have a councillor second that motion, please? Councillor Summer. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor Saley. What we're doing in this particular recommendation is that we're acknowledging that the sections of the community are deeply impacted. There are no winners here. In fact, there are no winners in any particular conflict whatsoever. And there has not been, particularly in the Middle East, for not only just years or decades, but we're talking centuries. This has gone on for so long, and it can't be resolved here in Shepparton. I understand, I have spoken directly with those loved ones who have been affected in Gaza, so I do understand the hurt that they are feeling here. We can, and we are acknowledging that deep impact that they have, and there are services that are provided here in the Golden Valley that support those that are in trauma, those that require extra additional support, and that can be sourced here locally. There are many organisations that are a safety net for these people as well, to help them. The second part of it is in regards to the Prime Minister's joint statement with other Prime Ministers as well, calling for an immediate ceasefire. And who wouldn't ask for a ceasefire? I mean, what we want is peace. We don't want to see any more hostilities. The Prime Minister's called upon that, and we support that. I've attended a number of vigils for peace, and as I've said before in my other statements, it is peace that we ask for here. And that has been what's been asked for by the Prime Minister, who is our representation there. Yes, we have a federal member of parliament here in Mr Birrell, but we also have 12 senators that represent Victoria. And so we can certainly advocate, and the community can advocate to those senators as well, who take up parliament in Canberra. So I ask that this recommendation please be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the
Yes, I like this version. It does acknowledge the grief in our community because of these atrocities and events, and it also puts the responsibility firmly back onto the federal government. And if people have residual concerns after the vote, if this is successful, I suggest they read the joint statement by the Prime Ministers of Australia, Canada and New Zealand, because it actually deals with many, or if not, well, most of what's been just debated. So all of these points in here, you will find them in here. It's already done, it's being done, so I support it.
Summer? Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Abdullah?
So, watered down version of the original motion has been circulated, has been distributed to councillors just 5 minutes before the meeting. So I want to say something about the mechanisms of this whole foreshadow motion. Throughout this term, we, as a councillors and in the leadership of our mayor, we have maintained this unwritten protocol that we will not be sort of putting a surprise or giving a surprise during the meeting or just before the meeting. Because the matters that are discussed during the meeting, they sometimes need, and most of the times they need thorough examination, pros and cons, issues and risks. What does the legislation say about it, and what are the other things? So as a policy, we always thought that this is the best thing, that we do not come up with surprises. And Mr. Mayor, you have repeatedly reminded us on many occasions. So I'm I'm surprised, I'm amazed, I'm disappointed. If there was an intention to put forward a watered down motion, or rather a different motion, then other councillors could have been could have been on the same page, they could have been taken into account, their views could have been taken into account. So that's my number one disappointment from this process. This foreshadow motion certainly does not include many points that were in the original motion. It is not, yes, it is not asking the council to write a letter and include the points that were included in the original motion. It is simply noting the Prime Minister's joint statement. A joint statement that has been ineffective so far because of many gaps and because of, this expectation from the community that Australian government, powerful governments can really do more, and they are not doing more. So that is the continued pressure that the community wants our council to advocate on our behalf. And look, I'm not going to repeat everything that has been said regarding this council. It's not within the council's scope, and we do not deal with the international conflicts, things like that, because obviously in my opening, when I moved the original motion, I had said and addressed all of those concerns. Obviously, none of those concerns have been heard properly, and they have not been understood. Because we are back to square one, that we do not deal with international conflicts. Anyways, I am not going to support this watered down motion. It is not even a watered down motion. It is a different motion. It is just noting that whatever the Prime Minister has said. It is not asking Council to write a letter to the federal government to take the actions. And some of the key actions that were included in the original motion, such as advocate for all Palestinians, call for, recognize the state of Palestine, call for Israel to comply with its obligations under international law, call for the immediate lifting of the siege on Gaza to allow Palestinians in Gaza to have unlimited access to food, water, fuel, and electricity, increasing funding to UNRWA, because my understanding is, and I've read it, that many places that the amount of funding that federal government is allocating to this issue, to Palestine, compared to other fundings is nominal. So we need to make sure that support is there from our government. And so this is the reason that I feel that this foreshadowed motion does not convey the intent and the sentiments of the original motion in its entirety. So I do not support this, and I also have a very, as I said, I'm deeply disappointed with the manner that this foreshadow motion has been presented to us. 3 councillors who moved the motion for the additional council meeting, they were absolutely kept in dark. They were not consulted. They were not given a heads up, and upon my inquiry, I got the impression that yes, there is something coming. And until last night, my hope was that something that is being discussed and being written down will be shared with other councillors at least 1 hour or 2 hours before the meeting, not 5 minutes before the meeting. So on the basis of those 2 reasons, I cannot support this motion.
Are there any councillors that would like to speak for the motion? Councillor Adam.
Thank you, Mayor Sally. In the absence of any other substantive motion, I will support this only because otherwise this has been a complete waste of time in the sense of not councillors' time, but the whole organisation. We wanted something substantive out of this out of today. This is a watered down motion. Obviously, the first point acknowledged that sections of the Greater Shepparton community are deeply impacted due to the events taking place. Obviously, that's something no one could object to. I fully agree. Note the Prime Minister of Australia's joint statement issued. Well, yeah, okay, we've noted that. I've read it too. It does call for immediate ceasefire, which ultimately is a starting point where any good work can be done, that any peace can evolve from, I suppose. Without a ceasefire, nothing can happen. So it's not about what these 2 points are, it's about what's not in there. But that's before me at the moment. But I also want to address something Councillor Brophy said. No one has ever suggested that this council can resolve this conflict or any other conflict. No one has said that. Not Councillor Abdullah, not Councillor Spinks, no one. That would be absurd to even think that. We know that. This is about taking a stance to let community members of Greater Shepparton, who are ratepayers, who are part of our community, part of a multicultural community, that in 2024, if we think these issues aren't going to arise in the future, you're kidding yourselves. They will continue on. If a Ukrainian community member came to me tomorrow and had a similar request, I'd bring it to council. Whether they're from an African country, anywhere else. We better get used to this. When you've got 100 or so different nationalities represented as part of our community, if you think we're back in the 1950s, we're not. This is going to become a common thing as these conflicts erupt around the world. So stop kidding yourselves. Having said that, I do support the motion on the grounds I just made.
Any other councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Spence.
Yeah, look, all I want to say is that felt like I was just witness to a beautiful dance that I wasn't told about beforehand. How nice that everyone spoke to the motion and then knew they were abstaining. But obviously, there's no real reason to not support this. But let's be clear, it's not doing anything. This is not a motion that actually does anything or responds to the community's petition and request to write a letter. Basically, what we've just witnessed is they asked us to do something and they said, no, it's not our job. So I'm going to support this because, of course, I acknowledge that people are impacted, and of course, we're noting that it's there's been a statement put out there, but it does nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spinks. Are there any other councillors that would like to speak to the motion? I'll speak in favour of obviously the foreshadowed motion, because just to pick up on the couple of comments that have been made by my fellow councillors around what sits within the statement if you haven't read it. So it's actually does address a lot of the requests that Councillor Abdullah. So the situation in Gaza is catastrophic. The human suffering is unacceptable. Continue. We all agree with that. Israel must listen to the concerns of international community. The protection of civilians is paramount and a requirement under international humanitarian law. That was within yours as well, that they had to abide by that. Obviously, I spoke earlier about some of the other comments that were needed. We are committed to working towards an irreversible path to achieving a two-state solution. That's what you've requested as well. So everything, if not all, most, if not all, that sits within Councillor Abdullah's motion is addressed within the most recent statement from 3 Prime Ministers around the world, including our own Australian Prime Minister. So I said, I tended to feel, in whatever capacity, doesn't really matter, because there are community members that I'm connected to that are hurting this particular conflict, and I went because that is the right thing to do. And from that, and I've shared with councillors that last time I abstained and we didn't take a position, and as things have progressed, I feel it is important that council publicly acknowledge formally in our capacity that we can, that clearly community are deeply impacted, and we've heard from you through the petition and other forms as well, and that's what we are doing today. We are publicly acknowledging that in a formal capacity, and all of the concerns that are raised with us are currently being dealt with higher levels of government, in particular our Prime Minister, and that sits within that joint statement. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. And I feel that this council is basically at where it can be. I'm not, as I said before, I'm not going to pretend to community that writing a letter will have an impact or get a greater outcome than what is already being discussed. We are not privy to conversations that are taking place from an international level. We have not been briefed on this. To talk about the process that was undertaken, we have not had a single council briefing in a formal capacity regarding what has taken place. This has been individually driven by Councillor Abdullah, and now obviously with Councillor Adam and Councillor Spinks requesting the additional council meeting. There was no advice about that. There was no briefing. The council meeting request has been sent to our CEO, and we were informed of an additional council meeting. There has been no inclusion process around briefings and sharing information and what. This is simply individually driven, and obviously yes.
So this motion is effectively the same that the notice of motion that was discussed in November. On many occasions, we have, yes,
Not at all.
No, it's not.
couple of points are different. In essence, it's the same. On many occasions, yes, there has not been a formal briefing because it was supposed to be a notice of motion. And it has been discussed in different, it was not brought by council officer.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a notice of motion. Unfortunately, then in August and in July, we missed the deadline. But in many conversations, this one has been discussed. So it's not as if it came as a surprise.
This foreshadowed motion,
Yes.
I've outlined that last year I abstained from it, and since then, I believe it's
No, sorry,
important.
this not this, sorry, got it wrong. Not the foreshadow motion. I'm talking about, when you're saying that this motion has not been, you were not taken into.
There's been no formal process.
Formal process,
Yeah,
yes.
there hasn't been.
Formal process, not formal process.
Correct.
This was a notice of motion which was already discussed in detail in November. So, and this was not a briefing matter because it was not a report that council officers
Correct.
wanted to bring or had to bring. It was purely on the initiative of three councillors, so that's why. So it's not something that.
Correct. My point is that it didn't go through a formal process, through executive, to briefings, to then be considered at an ordinary council meeting. That's what I'm saying that's taken place. So the foreshadowed motion that is being put forward is no different to any other process that we would undertake. That if councillors are not happy with the proposed item that is going forward to a council meeting, they're entitled to put a foreshadowed motion through. The difference is we weren't actually told about an additional council meeting. It was presented to us through the CEO. There was not an inclusive discussion about it. I, as mayor, got notification through our CEO that an additional council meeting would be called, and here we are.
Point of order, could we stay on context for the,
Yeah, I'm giving clarification of.
Having debate around
this. So I'm not going to have someone criticise the process that's been undertaken or what I've been involved in. I'm going to clear it up.
then call a point of order, but.
What, to myself?
Please, Chair.
What, call a point of order to myself?
No. This needs to tighten up.
So I think we got off track in pointing fingers about the process. The process has been really clear. An additional council meeting was called. It didn't go through normal process of briefing executive, briefing councillors, and now to council meeting. So the foreshadowed motion does exactly what I feel very comfortable doing after witnessing what has been taking place. No one can dismiss that. I constantly pray for peace every Friday. People know that. And I think this is an important step that this council is taking to acknowledge this publicly and support the Prime Minister's letter. Do you have any right of reply, Councillor Brophy?
Thank you, Mayor Saleh. I just want to clarify a few points on that. Firstly, Councillor Abdullah is correct. It is a different motion. It is not the same motion that has been put up that was lost. It is different, and therefore it shouldn't contain those things in it because it's a very different motion that I have put forward. The fact that you may have only received it 5 minutes before, I'd actually sent it out a lot earlier than that, but you may not have read it until then. The other point in regards to that was that you might be disappointed that you got it then. I've actually thought about it over the last week when we got the notification on that, and I only came to the conclusion that better off putting one in than not putting one in at all. And the fact that if we went back to even November, any of those that were supporting the original motion never had a conversation with me. I asked for one back in November. I never received it. And I've maintained my position in abstaining all the way through. And so much so in abstaining all the way through that I've done this alone. So whatever everybody else is doing, there's no great dance, there's nothing like that. I've just maintained exactly what I'm doing. So had this foreshadowed, it wouldn't have been read if the other original motion had have got up. So we wouldn't even be just talking about that now. But it's put forward and we'll put back to the mayor to go to the vote.
Thank you, councillor Brophy. Those councillors in favour? Against? Motion carried.
Division.
Thank you. Those councillors in favour, councillor Sali, councillor Spinks, councillor Brophy, councillor Latson, councillor Dobson, councillor Adam, councillor Summer. Those against, councillor Abdullah. Motion carried. Councillors, item 7, close of meeting, which I will do now at 3 p.m.